everybody. Welcome back to the channel. If you've been watching all the other videos in this series up until this point, then you may have some sort of an idea as to what we're up to next. First of all, if you have been watching all the videos in the series, thanks for that. And if you haven't, I'm going to just real quick put a little link up in the upper right-hand corner so you can go back just in case you need to. Now, what we're up to today, coloring and also light and shadow rendering. So we're going to handle this in two main phases. We're going to take care of our basic main mid-tone coloring things for our figures, and then get into the light and shadow rendering in the same video here. So there's a lot to get to. It's going to take us a little while. I don't want to belabor the point too much. Let's just jump right into it. When it comes to coloring, there is a very specific method I use. And although there are different ways to do this, I'm going to tell you right now, I think this is best for me when it comes to doing this simple coloring methods like comic books, cartoons, and things like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at our layer stack, and we can see what we've been up until this point. I have a couple layers down here that represent some of my rough sketches, but the main inks here represented by the Morty layer right here and the Rick layer right here. And they're on separate layers just to make the coloring process a little bit easier for me. So what I'm going to do is just kind of start at the back and work my way forward. So for just the time being, I'm going to hide Rick and focus my attention on Morty. Now I'm going to follow a step-by-step process on Morty, but you're going to find that I'm just going to pull the same exact steps a little bit later and start all over again and repeat it with the Rick figure a little bit later. So first things first, I'm going to duplicate my Morty line work. Then I'm going to go into this upper layer of Morty, and I'm going to alpha lock it. That's going to be important a little bit later on, but basically what it's all about is just kind of preserving that if I ever need to come back to it, and make sure that I have an unchanged kind of copy that I deem to be, perfect for the time being. I'm going to do all my coloring work in the layer underneath of it, and this kind of gets into something of a review of what we covered in our last video when we talked about inking. When I inked the Rick and Morty figures, I made sure that I had no closed off lines. Now, what I mean by that is when I got to this portion of his torso down here, I made sure it was closed off and there were no open gaps in the line work. That's going to come in really handy right now when I do the coloring, because what I intend to do here is basically just take this Morty layer and just do really quick paint fills just to get him colored in quickly. And I'm just going to use some ridiculous color for it. This will be important later. So I'm just going to use this neon green that I have, just make sure I'm on the right layer, and then I'm just going to start dropping it in everywhere. I'm just going to fill in the whole Morty figure. Now there's a problem there, it seems. I've got a leak somewhere, and I'm not exactly sure where it is, so what I'm going to do is just kind of draw around my line work here a little bit, just to make sure I get it closed off really good before I attempt to do a fill again. It happens to me sometimes, but this is why I try to be very careful about it when I do this. And it was something, again, I brought up a little bit in the last video, just because, it's all about making sure that you do the right amount of prep work to make this go a little bit faster when you get to this stage in the piece. So, maybe more than anything else, sometimes, or at least the way I work, is I try to kind of think about 2 or 3 steps ahead. Sometimes digital art can be something of a chess game. You're trying to think those 3 or 4 or 5 steps ahead with your layers, with your rendering, and ultimately having that, picture in your head of what the final product should look like when you get all your little tricks and problem-solving things done. Now, I'm getting some tinier areas here, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of color those in by hand rather than do the fill and risk having it spill over into an area I don't want. Take a look like I did right now. I'm just going to back that out, and I really want to make sure that my coloring stays within my line work. Again, this is going to be really important when we get into the next stage. And I know it may be a little bit weird that I'm using this odd neon green, but again, all will be revealed in just a couple minutes, so stay tuned. And hey, while I'm doing this, maybe it's time for my selfish plug. If you haven't already, take a minute here to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you have the opportunity, share. I'd love to get the word out about this channel and, certainly grow into a larger audience. And for that, I thank you. All right, so we got Morty done here. Let's go ahead and take a look at Rick. We're going to do something similar. So I'm going to bring Rick back into frame. I'm going to duplicate the layer and then take the top one, alpha lock it, and focus my attention on the layer underneath. I'm going to choose an equally ridiculous color here. Let's go with maybe like a nice purple. And we're going to do the same thing with Rick. We're just going to use the bottom layer as closed set of line works to just kind of do really quick paint fills to get our layer filled in here. Now, what I want to make sure I don't do when I'm going through here and doing all this is that I don't want to accidentally do a fill on my line work. And let me give you an example of what I'm showing about, or what I'm talking about. Right now, this layer right here is sitting on top of everything. So that's why I'm kind of coloring underneath of it without any risk of doing damage to my line work. But let me just hide that for a second. And notice that again, underneath where I'm filling in, all those lines are still intact. But if I'm not careful, if I'm on this layer where I'm doing the coloring, and I drag over here and leave it to fill in on my line work layer, it changes all my colors subtly here. Again, let me hide that layer and you can see what happened. It's not really the effect I want. When all is said and done, I want everything to be the same shade of purple, and because it was dropped on a black line work, it changed the hue, and again, not what I'm looking for. This may not make a whole lot of sense now, but bear with me, all will be revealed in a couple minutes, I promise. So let me just go ahead and back that out. All right, and we'll go back and just be a little bit more careful about how we do our fills to make sure that we don't commit that heinous mistake. Let me point out here, I'm hiding the upper line work layer. Now the reason I'm doing that is because when I color in, notice I can color over the line work now and make sure I get those tinier areas filled in with this basic color, but I can always lay my line work back over it and you can see no harm, no foul. That's kind of why I'm taking this approach to it. But again, a lot of work to be done here, so bear with me while I kind of try to barrel through this as quickly as I can so we can kind of get to the more interesting parts. I know this can be a little bit boring, and I know a lot of you probably have some pretty itchy trigger fingers when it comes to the fast forward button, but I gotta tell you, I love it when somebody takes the time and effort to sit through all my rambling without fast forwarding. So thanks if you are one of those people that really truly watches from beginning to end. All right, now let me go ahead and we'll do some coloring here, just to get this filled in quick, just like so. There we go, and a little here, and I can fill that in pretty easily. There we go. All right, now let's go ahead and put the line work layer back on top of it so you can see, again, nothing's been really messed up here. Everything's intact the way I want it. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and hide the ink layer for both the Rick and the Morty figures. And I'm going to alpha lock the colored layers that I just created. Now that I have a really solid layer that has a color that I'm looking for to kind of separate everything out, I want to get rid of the black lines. I already, again, have line work saved on another layer, so I don't need it on this layer underneath. So all I'm going to do is just basically, again, alpha lock the layer that has the color in it, and then use that same exact color just to color over the black lines and just make it all one solid silhouette, if you like the explanation there. Okay, just like that. There we go. All right. Now again, nothing's been broken here, so to speak. All I have to do is bring it back in my line work layer, and I'm still good to go. Now all I have to do is I'm just going to hide Rick for a minute, and I'm going to do the same thing to Morty. I'm going to hide Morty's line work layer, just like so. I'm going to go under the color layer, which has already been alpha locked. I'm going to select the same green color that I used for the inner fill, and I'm going to use it to color in the black lines on that fill layer. All right, there we go. Got rid of them all. Just don't need them. I want everything one solid silhouette. And again, no problem. Just put my line work back over top of it, and everything's back to normal. Now, these ridiculous colors, these extreme colors are here just so I can easily just eyeball the separation between layers. I know that may not necessarily be all that important when it comes to just something as simple as two figures standing right next to each other, but I use this method for all my work, and I'm kind of getting the habit of it, and it's very handy when you have a whole lot of layers to deal with multiple things like, background, middle ground, foreground, multiple figures, maybe some objects mixed in there. And again, when you have like a large layer stack, this makes things a little bit easier just to visualize and move forward. So let's go ahead and talk about next stages. Again, we're going to go back into our Rick and Morty figures and do some enhancements, starting with Morty. In order to do this, I want to add just, a couple brand new layers up in here. And I don't have a specific number in mind. I'll work with them until I have enough. And if I need to, I'll add more. No big deal. But I want to kind of get into specific colors for Morty that we are familiar with just by having watched the cartoon. So what I want to do here is I'm going to choose the layer right above Morty's green, and I'm just going to add a clipping mask to it. I've discussed clipping masks in previous videos, and I know that a lot of other people on YouTube have as well. It's just basically a matter of being able to take whatever is underneath of it and being able to color freely without going outside what was kind of attached to the layer underneath of it. So all that green is there to inform where I can lay down the other colors for Morty. That's why I did it that way. I laid out all that green silhouette so that way I could create clipping masks going forward. Now I have some specific colors I want from Morty here, and I'm going to add them in layers above this little green piece right here. So let's start with something of a flesh tone. Let's go with maybe, and I'm eyeballing this. Certainly you can always pick up a reference photo and do some color picking out of it. But I gotta tell you, I'm not a big fan of that personally, and it's mostly because I think it can be crippling. If you spend too much time using pictures and references to pick your colors for you, it becomes harder and harder to just to pick them out by eyeballing them. And that's exactly a skill that I'd like to kind of, work on and exercise and enhance as best I can. So I try not to ever really kind of pick colors out of reference photos or anything like that. I just try to kind of pick them organically on my own. Again, just by eyeballing it. And I may not necessarily get it 100% on most of the time or even a portion of the time. But I tell you, I get close. And 9 times out of 10, you probably couldn't notice much of the difference. And every single time I kind of exercise that skill, so to speak, I just get a little bit better and a little bit better. And, I start also having that ability to kind of see nuances, slight differences in color when I'm looking at my references also. So that's kind of helpful too. So I don't have to be as exact about this as I am right now, but I want to kind of make sure this is somewhat decent looking before I kind of move on to my next color. Relatively happy with that. Let's go ahead and move in. And I know I've been saying relatively happy with that a lot in these videos. I apologize. You kind of get in the zone sometimes and kind of are trying to run on autopilot with commentary and the drawing at the same time. So hopefully the repetitive catchphrase there isn't really getting on your nerves too much. Now I'm looking for a nice bright yellow for Morty's shirt here. I think we're going to try that out and see how it looks. Nope, I don't like it well enough. And I can tell the reason why is that it's just not really as yellow as I wanted. And, it can be really hard to tell that sometimes, but I have this great background to kind of help inform those decisions. So when I do coloring, I make sure that the background is about a mid-tone gray as I can. And I mean completely devoid of any hue of color at all, and truly a mid-level gray, kind of halfway between pure white and halfway between pure black. So if I was going to choose that color for my background right now, I would actually put it right about here. Again, no yellow at all, completely on the edge of my square here, and again, midway between white, black, right here. That's what I'm looking for, and that's exactly what you're seeing in the background. It helps me really get a good judge of these colors that I'm trying to kind of pick out just by eyeballing. So let's take a look at that yellow, see if that helps. It's still a little bit too saturated. Let me go maybe a little bit more towards the white, and we'll take a look at that. And again, I have a reference photo up here on my screen that leads me to think that I think this is relatively close. So I'm going to put this in. But again, I'd like to point out here that the shirt color is on its own layer. And because it's on its own layer, I can fill in some more colors around it on other layers, and then make a later judgment as to whether or not the shirt is the right hue, and I can make some small adjustments to it later based on how it compares with the other colors surrounding it. Again, I think this is pretty close, but I can always enhance a little bit later, saturate a little bit more, desaturate it, lighten, darken, so on and so forth. I might even say the same thing about the flesh tone. I'm not sure I quite nailed this flesh tone, so I'm going to keep those two on their own separate layers, and I'm also going to go ahead and get into another clipping mask layer where I start to lay in some of the other colors that we have here, such as our eyeballs. I'm going to go with never pure white, just a little tint of blue in there for the eyeball, and get it colored in just like so. And this won't take long, and it takes up a relatively small amount of space in this layer. So instead of going to a brand new layer to work on the coloring of the gun, I think I'm just going to keep it on the same layer as these eyeballs right here, just to kind of save a little bit of time and effort. All right. Yeah, you know what? Before I get into the gun, why don't we just tackle the hair really quick? We can do that on this layer too. Thinking, something like that. And again, I can be a little bit careless about my coloring because these clipping masks, I don't have to worry too much about going outside the lines, but I can certainly go in this flesh area here, so I just want to be careful of that. All right, now I do see that there's a small little imperfection in the little flesh piece right here, so let me just go ahead and go back to my skin layer. Oops, choose the color, get that in there, and yeah, all right. Now, brand new layer, one more for the gun. Now, the gun doesn't really have any specific, colors that are assigned to it based off of the cartoon because I've largely just kind of invented it on the fly. But I do know that there are some guns that have been similar to this, so I want to try to kind of go off memory here on what I seem to remember they look like. And I seem to kind of remember there was a lot of blue in there. So I'm going to go in and just lay all this in here as blue. And then maybe we'll just kind of add some colors on top of it just to kind of enhance and give it some interest a little bit. So get all that in there really good. And I'm going over some of my lines here. I'll come back in with the eraser in just a second and get that. Just want to make sure I get all that in. And again, we'll just play a little cleanup now, just like so. And while doing this cleanup, I notice here that I still have a couple of imperfections in my skin layer, right? So I'm going to go back and fix that really quick too, just, while I'm here. This is the perfectionist in me, but also, if I was going to print this, it really wouldn't kind of stand up to much scrutiny because of that bright green kind of popping out. Having said that, why do you think I chose bright green? It's going to really stand out and make sure that if I missed any small areas that they really kind of shine out to my eye and I can find them, zoom in, and take care of them when I find them. But again, it's like a treasure hunt here or a needle in a haystack, and so that bright neon color really kind of helps visualize it when I've made that error. All right, now back to the gun. Now let's see here. I'm going to lay a couple of colors on top of it, just for some interest. So let me go with a red here really quick. And I think I want to make the tip of the gun red, just like so. And I think I want to make this button here red too. All right. Let's see. Let me go back and I'm going to choose this blue color. And I think I'm going to go just a little bit, maybe gray and maybe a little bit more saturated maybe and dark with it. And I think what I'm going to do here is I just use that as the color for the two ends. Now, I haven't really talked much about color theory in this, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not exactly the resident authority on it. I know some basics, certainly, but I think one thing I can certainly share with you that I've kind of learned through trial and error and through other means is that when I am choosing my colors here, generally speaking, I'm trying to go with mid-saturation. So this blue here you can see sits around the middle, even though I went brighter or darker. I kind of kept it roughly around the middle in terms of saturation. If I go ahead and color choose the yellow in Morty's shirt, there you go. You can see, again, it's rather bright, but it still kind of sits roughly around the middle. Same thing with the skin tone. If I can just select that really quick. It's a little bit over to the left here, but largely still in the middle, and so on and so forth. You're going to see a lot of repetition on this when it comes to Rick as well. Now, why? What's the purpose behind this? Well, it's just the understanding that I'm going to be coming in and going lighter and darker later. I'm going to be going this way and that way a little bit later when I get into rendering of shadow and light. So I want to keep everything kind of in the middle for right now, and I'll go to the more extremes when I'm trying to kind of pull out some three-dimensionality a little bit later on. All right, now I do want a neon green in here, so I just happen to kind of still have that from when I filled in Morty in that color. So let me just select that really quick. And the reason for the neon green, again, we're actually outside this little mid-range I want, is because I wanted to have some luminosity. I wanted to kind of be almost like a light gauge or a lit up display in the gun. And I want to do something similar with the Rick gun as well. There's a little kind of meter over in here, over on the right-hand side somewhere in Rick's gun that I think I'm going to give some luminosity to and just kind of give it something to kind of look like some sort of an energy bar charging meter or something to that effect. All right. Now, I don't want to go too much out of the color scheme here and put 15 million different colors and the whole rainbow just to kind of distract you from the figure's hand. So I'm largely going to leave this as is, but I do want to just do one last thing here. And just kind of create that darker mark in this little piece over here. And I do think I want maybe just a touch of yellow, just kind of go with Morty's shirt. So I'm just going to put a little bit of yellow in here on the scope, just like so. And maybe there in the bar, just like that. And one last little touch up here. I'm going to take the darker blue, and I'm just going to kind of work in that little green area, just kind of give that some enhancement and a little bit of detail. All right. I think maybe I could benefit from one last little splash of yellow here. And let's take a look. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I did all this, just a couple layers. I'm, again, very happy with it, but I don't necessarily need to keep all these layers anymore. I think I'm pretty happy with the yellow. I don't necessarily know that I want to change the hue anymore. I'm definitely happy with the flesh tone. I don't really feel any need to change that. But understand, there is something to kind of consider when it comes to this. If you are looking to, work in a more professional capacity, you may want to leave these layers alone and always have that ability to change the shirt color. If you were working for a client, say, maybe the client comes back and says, yellow's wrong, I want a red shirt. And you will have the ability very easily just to kind of come into that layer, alpha lock it just like so, and then just go pick your red and just color it in without too much work at all. I mean, that was very, very simple, very fast, and almost no effort. So let me back that out. I want the yellow, and we'll go ahead and move in to our Rick figure. Now, again, I like these Morty colors, so I'm just going to go ahead and collapse them all in on each other. I think that's going to stay as is. I'm not going to make any more changes, but I am going to repeat this process with Rick, just add some blank layers above this colored layer, and then go to it. So make sure I add some clipping masks here for these layers as I go along, so I don't forget. And much like before, I'm going to start just basically doing some judgment calls on the hues and the colors and kind of go from there. Now, I'm going to start with the flesh tone. Rick is actually, it's kind of hard to explain, maybe a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more gray than the flesh tone on Morty. Maybe this is explained by the fact that he's older. Let me see how that looks. Yeah, it's just not quite as pale, almost maybe a little bit of a tan. Yeah, I'm happy with it. I'm going to keep it in as is, and I'm just going to kind of scribble it in here because I know I'm going to lay over it soon with the hair and some other detail like the eyes. So I can be a little sloppy with this one. We'll be able to clean it up in just a little bit. But since I'm here, I'm also going to take care of the hands. Again, I'm going to be drawing colors over top of that, so I can just lay it in nice and sloppy. Take care of the rest of the cleanup later when I get to those colors. All right. Let's go ahead and move on into the hair next. So let me just take this clipping layer, move it down. We'll work on top of it so we can cover up the mistakes we made. Now we're going to pick out Rick's hair color, which I'm going to make a judgment call. Again, kind of in the mid-range here a little bit. I don't want to go too bright though. I'm going to go roughly around there. I think that is close. And again, I'll keep it on its own layer in case I want to tweak it and just maybe mess with the hue on that a little bit later. You see here I made a mistake in the skin where I left a open area designated by that bright purple. Again, it just stands out to me. That's why I use those really kind of outrageous colors. But we will go back and fix it in just a minute after we get the hair in. There we go. And I'm trying to go through this as fast as I can. I know that this may not necessarily be the most interesting thing in the world to watch me play coloring book here. But, what I'm trying to do is just get my color in as fast as possible because I also don't like to spend a lot of time on this step. This can be pretty monotonous to me, and if it gets too boring, too quick, I tend to abandon it and just forget about it. And, obviously I have a vested interest in finishing this piece, so I'm going to move through it quickly and get to the interesting part, which for me is rendering shadow and light. Now, truth be known, just kind of peek ahead here a little bit, we are not going to be spending a whole lot of time rendering shadow and light because there's not a lot of nuance to put in this. It's all going to be very simplistic in terms of its approach, and mostly because, again, it's a cartoon, so we don't really have much of a need to really kind of make this too complex. I'm going to select the color of Morty's eyes and use that for Rick's eyes. No reason not to. And again, just makes things a little bit easier for me. Just like so. It was a little bit sloppy. Let me kind of correct that. I'm on the skin layer here and just drew over top of it. So I'm just going to select the skin color and just recolor those areas where it's a little bit off. And I can also see I've done something similar in the hair. The hair has a little area that has a small imperfection in it. So let me go back to the hair layer, choose the color, and it's right here around the eyeball. Up a couple little other areas here where I'm seeing purple. So let me go back into the skin layer and just make these small corrections. Again, just kind of take a look at them as you go along. No harm in kind of zooming in and making sure that everything's just nice and tight. and solid. I mean, these little imperfections are really what make the difference between good-looking pro-level work and something that comes off just, more amateurish. The fact of the matter is, Rick and Morty is not the most complex drawing in the entire world. It's a cartoon where the artists don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time drawing the figures because they're just so simple in nature and not necessarily beholden to proper anatomy. That doesn't mean it's not good art, though. Even something as simple as this needs to be rendered in such a way where it looks professional, and that means making sure slight imperfections don't exist, like the color didn't reach all the way to the edge or something like that. This is kind of like cooking, in the sense that, like, if you were to make some sort of a dish that was very simple, like a cheeseburger, well, cheeseburgers are simple in their basic ingredients. It's beef, it's cheese, it's maybe a couple of condiments and a bun. But that simplicity can be deceiving in the sense that if you mess something up, it's going to really just kind of be bold and stand out to you. And your art's going to be a similar way. If you're trying to go for a professional look versus amateur, well, the amateurs or the amateurish look don't correct small little errors. It's not that you can't have simplistic drawings, it's that you literally have to make sure that these simple little mistakes that are easily avoidable don't haunt your piece, because that's what makes it look amateurish. I'll get off my soapbox now. That's just kind of my opinion on it. Your mileage may vary. All right, so let's see here. I'm going to go into a new layer, and I'm going to start getting into the shirt, which is a similar color to the hair, but it's just a slightly different shade. So I'm going to go in there and put it in now. You can see another little mistake I made around the neck where I didn't get the skin color all the way in there, so I'll come back to that in a second. But I'm going to correct some of the coloring errors I did on the hand right here. There we go. And Rick has inner sleeves on this inner shirt that I didn't quite put in the line for here on the arm, so I'm just going to kind of color it in like this and just leave it as is. I'll fix that up in touch-ups a little bit later. And then his other sleeve comes up to his hand like this. Okay. And you know what? There is a little bit of spittle coming out of his mouth, similar shade of blue, so I'm just going to kind of put it in while I'm here. All right. Why don't we take a look at a new layer and his jacket. Now, his jacket is white, but again, I don't really go pure white. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to kind of go to just a very, very light bluish gray. And let me just test it out really quick. And look, if you notice, it kind of comes off mostly white. So not really a lot of problems caused by doing it this way. But this is where I want to kind of start being very careful about where I lay down my color, because I have some cleanup to do, and I don't want to create more messes for myself down the line. I'm kind of running out of colors to color with, so to speak. And again, don't be afraid to kind of zoom in and zoom out. If it's giving you a headache, I apologize, but it really kind of makes me go a little bit faster if I can kind of zoom in and make sure that I'm laying these colors down exactly where they need to be and not outside their lines in a sloppy manner. Again, I just like to work in a very, very clean fashion, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get it right. Now, again, I'd like to kind of just point out here, because I don't know that I've necessarily mentioned it clearly before. This method of just getting in what's referred to as your midtones is not necessarily the only way to do this. If you have some method that works better for you, use it. This is just something that's comfortable for me, but it's not the way you have to do things. The only point behind all of this is just to get your basic colors in, so that way you have some place to work off of when it comes to addressing your values of light and shadow a little bit later on. Mostly done here. Got the gun as the major piece that's left. I'm going to work in something of a bluish gray here, I think. Let me just kind of, again, get a new layer up here. And let me just kind of see how that looks. Yeah, I like it. So let's go ahead. Now, again, this is not going to be my only color for the gun. I'm just going to lay this in here, and we'll add in some of that detail work like I did with Morty's gun, just as soon as we kind of get this base color kind of punched in. Shouldn't take too long, but I am going to make the effort to make sure that I work around the areas where I don't want it to spill over, like in the fingers, for instance. And the jacket. So we'll really kind of be careful around some of those other areas because we don't want to make those little errors that can lose our professional quality look. But hopefully you can see where this is starting to take shape now. Starting to get something that looks really nice to look at. And even though we're not done, we've still got several areas of work left to do. Hopefully you're starting to see, or at least get an idea, of what our final product is going to look like in your imagination. Or more importantly, what it's going to look like when it's done. Maybe you can imagine what it's going to look like when it's done. So there we go. Now again, let's add some detail in. I want to kind of tie it into Morty's gun a little bit, so I'm going to choose and repeat some colors like the green and that little energy bar I mentioned before. There we go. And we'll get that gunmetal color back just to kind of punch that in. Let's choose that red. I think we can use the red over here also, right here. Our little button. And let's see, what else do we have here? We're going to be adding in some shadow colors a little bit later, but I think what I might want to do is just maybe lighten up this little barrel piece right here. And again, these are just flat colors, so don't think that it's going to really be finished once I've got done this basic coloring in here. I've got some light and shadow I want to render that are going to help, darken some colors on here, lighten some colors on here, and hopefully maybe even give us a small illusion of some kind of gunmetal chromish shine, so to speak. We'll get there. All right, so far so good. Happy with what we got. Let me go ahead and I'll collapse all these layers in. So we have one color layer for Morty, one color layer for Rick. And let's also just, again, remind everybody, we have line work layers that are really, really kind of important to our composition also. So let's go ahead and pull them back up and move into the next phase. Next phase, shadow and light. And I want to tackle in this video, so, I'm going to apologize right now for getting a little bit long-winded on this, but the shadow and light method is actually pretty simple, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time discussing like the theory and how, because it's something you can find in some other videos I've made. So again, I'll put another link up in the upper right-hand corner if you want to take a look at a series of videos I've done that specifically speak to light and color, or excuse me, light and shadow rendering. There's actually one in particular I think I'm going to put up there that really kind of breaks it down in just like a 5 or 10 minute video. So leave some comments if you like that. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and let's go ahead and move on. Now, Morty, let's start with him. I'm going to add a couple layers above him, and these layers I'm also going to set to clipping masks just to make it easier to get my rendering in. The bottom layer, I'm going to change to a multiply blend mode, and the upper one, a hard light blend mode. Now, I'm going to do a layering here so it's just kind of clear what we're up to. Layer 9, I'm going to label, rename, shadow. And layer 10, I'm going to rename light. Okay. Now let's review. Multiply for shadow, hard light for light. Again, I'm not really going to get into the whys and the theory behind this. Go ahead and check some previous videos on it. But that having been set up here, I'm going to do something similar for Rick in just a minute. But before I do, I'm going to take one layer, pop it all the way up at the top, and I'm going to rename this one too. I'm going to give it a name and call it palette. This is going to be my color palette for my shadow work and my light work. Now, I'm going to just put down on this new layer up at the top here, just a big black bar, so that way I can see my palette colors nice and easy. So this is essentially my palette right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start choosing our shadow colors and our light colors for our palette. Now, we have a portal that's sitting behind them that's going to be something of a source of light, and that light is largely green. So I'm going to call cool lights for our palette here. Let's go ahead and start putting those in. Again, we know that they're going to be green, so that's really going to be easy to choose. So we come into our green here, and again, this is going to be our light. So I'm going to get something that's really largely towards the white end of the green scale. And I'm going to kind of color in a little blob here so I can go back and select it later. Now, I might want some kind of brighter lights, maybe some highlights. So I'm going to also pick something that's a little bit closer to the pure white, but not quite there. I will use this very sparingly, just for highlights. Now let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum so I can take a look at my shadows. My shadows are going to be warm to complement the cool light. So I'm going to work in something of this kind of purplish area here, purple being the opposite of green. And I'm going to just largely desaturate. I want my shadows to be more gray than anything else. I have a hint of the purple in there, just enough to kind of give it a little bit of a hint of color. But again, largely gray in a lot of respects. Again, put that down. And then I want to go back and choose a second shadow color that basically just moves more towards the darker arena. Not pure black by any stretch of the imagination, but we're really kind of knocking on its door. Looks a little something like this. Now these are what the pure colors look like in their true form. This palette layer has no blend layers selected on it. It is set to a normal mode. But I can't say the same thing for my shadow layer and my light layer, and that's where this, again, is going to get really interesting. Let's go ahead and get some drawing done. I'm going to start with shadows, so I'm going to pick my shadow color here, and it's time to put in some shadows on Morty. I'm going to go pretty quick at this. Remember, this is all kind of clip art and selected and everything like that, so I can just kind of put some shadow in with a little bit of a reckless abandon, so to speak. I don't really want to spend a lot of time, you know, in detail and nuance here. This is a cartoon, so simple is generally better. And yeah, just really quickly, just trying to get this in such a way that kind of makes sense, but without overthinking it. Now, just a quick word on how this shadow method is working. This is really just kind of all about using that blend layer on a multiply, which allows, in this case, of the tip of the gun, the red to kind of shine up through the purple shadowish color that I'm laying over top of it. Now, if I was working in something that is a little bit more photorealistic, I might go back with the little smudge tool set to something of like an airbrush type setting. And I might go in here and kind of smudge some of this around just to kind of give it a more subtle look. And again, for photorealistic type stuff, that's kind of the norm. You'll want some softer shadow that kind of gives a little bit of more depth to the piece, and again, more of a feeling of three-dimensionality more than anything else. Cartoons don't really require that as much. We can be a little bit more simple with our shadows, which again saves us time. So I'm not going to belabor the point other than just to say that if you are interested in how to do some of that more subtle rendering, again, just go back and take a look at some of my videos. I work in a couple different styles, and I've certainly got some stuff that might interest you. And if you are, interested in a completely different method than this one, I also encourage you to check out my videos related to grayscale painting before doing coloring. It's something I've experimented with. It's a pretty effective method. Not necessarily one of my favorites, but again, it's effective for a specific type of look. Not necessarily one that lends itself to cartooning per se, but again, back in that kind of photorealistic portrait type category. All right, I think we got a little something here, but just to make sure I'm kind of on the right path, let's switch over to the light layer. So we're going to go into our light layer. We're going to choose our light green for this. And remember, this portal's behind Morty, so we're basically just going to kind of put the green down on the edges of his shirt and the edges of his profiles, or silhouette, so to speak. So I'm going to get a little bit into his hair, not a whole lot. Just along the top there, just a little bit. A bit around his eye, around the side of his face. Not really much else there, but I will do a little bit on his gun. Just to kind of give it some of that lighted effect too. And a little bit on his arms. I think we get a little something to work with there. Now, I am going to use that smudge tool just a little bit. Again, it's been set to a soft airbrush, and all it really does is just kind of, Just takes down that harsh, hard line a little bit, which I don't mind so much for the shadows here, but I definitely want to be a little bit more subtle with light, especially around the hair. It's just kind of a stark contrast here. And just a little bit of blend will go a long way, just to kind of give it a little bit more of the look that I like. But again, I just don't want to overdo it. This can be overdone pretty quickly. And do something similar with his shirt. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm calling it. All right, let's go to move on to Rick. We're going to do the same exact thing, okay? We're going to add 2 layers. 1, clipping mask, 2, clipping mask. Let's rename them really quick so we're clear on what we're up to. First one is shadow. Second one, rename light. Okay, going to the shadow, we're going to make this a blend mode called multiply. It's the one all the way to the top. Always use multiply for my shadows. But when it comes to lights, I actually vary it up a little bit. Depending on the mood or the tone I'm going for, it might be soft light, hard light, vivid light, linear light, maybe even a pin light. I tend to side more in the hard light category, but sometimes I'll just kind of go back when it's all said and done and flip through these a little bit and see which one gives me the look I like the most. For right now, maybe permanently, we'll stick with hard light. All right, same thing we did before. We're going to start with shadow. I'm going to pick my shadow color. And I'm going to start getting this in here. A lot of different areas where Rick's going to have shadow here. He's got, like, you know, these little things that hide behind his lapels. He's holding this big gun that has its own shadow that's going to be cast. And I'll explain this a little bit later here, but for right now, I'm just going to kind of color in most of the gun with this shadow color. I've got a little bit of a trick I'm kind of trying to pull off here. We'll see if it works or not. For right now, again, just kind of bear with me and all will be revealed in just a bit. Definitely want some of that shadow on the gun barrel there. But, you know, this is meant to be a little bit more of a reflective surface, so I'm going to kind of try to render that as best I can by kind of throwing shadow all over the place, just like that, with some reflected light in there too, or at least some areas I can put some reflected light a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to get this little piece in here like this. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead back with my eraser and just kind of clean up any place I've gotten a little bit sloppy, like around the shirt here and stuff like that. I'll go back and put in some more shadow a little bit later on, but I want to kind of focus my attention on the gun for just a moment. Yeah, okay, not too shabby. All right, now let's go ahead and add in some more shadow here for the other parts. So let's go ahead and kind of put something in here for his fingers. Most of this is under the gun, so it's, you know, going to be pretty heavy shadow here. So just kind of be a little bit sloppy with that. Same thing with the sleeve down here and the inner portion of the sleeve of the jacket. So I kind of get all that colored in one big fell swoop. All right, this back portion of the arm is going to be well away from the light also, so I can go ahead and get that in. And it's also going to be something of a cast shadow on his fingers down here. Behind the jacket right there. And I'm going to have the hand kind of cast a shadow on the jacket, but I just don't need that shadow blob that big. So I'll kind of loosen it up a little bit, like so. And then we can do a little something like that. And I can see right here, I got some purple. Let me go back and change that really quick. Now, this is going to be handy. So I'm going to go into the layer here where I have the main kind of mid-tones. I'm going to select the jacket color, get that colored in. Nice and easy. Not a big interruption to my workload here. But now I have a problem. In essence, I want to go back to my shadow coloring and continue the rendering. But let's just assume I never took the time to set up the palette here. Could I just go and select this color right here that I've already laid down, go back into my shadow layer, and start coloring it in? Well, the answer is no, it doesn't match. And if I want to kind of continue with the path I was going down, it might be close, but this is going to stand out as something that says, hey, your shadows are a little bit inconsistent. So the way that you solve that is by creating a palette. I can go back and reselect this, go back under my multiply mode, and match the color perfectly without any interruption. So it's just a little bit of a time saver, not much else other than that. Okay, just want to make sure I kind of really just heavily lay down shadow wherever it's, kind of appropriate. There's going to be some areas here that are really definitely away from the light. Don't want to really kind of spend a lot of time putting it in a little bit at a time because it just gets time consuming. And if you recall, I think there was a mistake made up there at that neck area a little bit earlier too. So I'm going to go ahead and correct that now also. Whoop, there we go. And a little bit of tweaking on the jacket there. Just like that. I think I may have seen something down by the gun also. Yeah. All right. So far, so good. Still some more work to do, though. So let's go ahead again. Back to our shadow color here. We'll go into our shadow layer. And we still got some more sleeve work to do here, for instance. And I'm going to leave his spine, so to speak, alone, because a little bit of it does certainly have the light shining behind it that we'll see in a little bit. Let's go ahead and work on his face some. We can take care of his neck and his head. I'm going to kind of just put a cast shadow from his head down his shoulder a little bit. Let's go ahead into his hair. We've definitely got some shadow there. His ear. There we go. His nose a little bit there. We got a small little coloring problem with this ear over here, so let's just get that taken care of. There we go. And look, I know I'm moving through this pretty quickly, but this just really kind of comes from practice. I use this method so often that switching back and forth between layers and brushes and color palettes has just gotten to be muscle memory for me at this point. So take the time to learn it, take the time to practice it, and it will come to you pretty quickly when the time is right. All right, now I'm okay with this, but I feel like there's a little bit more work I can do by adding a darker shadow. So I'm going to select my darker shadow. I'm going to add it to some areas that I think can really be enhanced by it, like the small little undercarriage of the gun. I think can go a little bit darker, and at least part of the trigger also. Now, I probably should be adding this new shadow color onto a brand new layer just to kind of protect the work underneath of it, but I kind of forgot to. And rather than spend the time boring you with backing this all out and starting all over again, I'm just going to push forward and just be slightly more careful about mistakes going forward. There we go. But there's certainly some areas here that would get a lot darker than the first layer of shadow that I put down. So I just want to kind of make sure I kind of pay attention to those areas as much as possible. Not every area, but there's some. And so I just want to get them done. Again, just quickly, without spending too much time overthinking it. But the main reason I kind of went for this extra shadow is because I want to use it to help me render something of a gunmetal texture on this barrel piece right here. So you can kind of start to see how that's coming together. We're not quite done. We'll add some light into it, and I think that'll help it sing and shine there a little bit. Okay. Now I got a little bit of sloppy work here, so let me kind of color this in too. I think we might be, kind of getting to the stage where we can switch over to the lights in just a second. Just want to do a little bit of touch-up work here. Again, just take a zoomed-out approach. I think we're okay there. Let's go ahead and move on to the light and get into it. So let's start with this little gun barrel here. Wrong layer. That's why that looks so horrible. Let's go into our light layer. There we go. That blend mode makes all the difference in the world now, doesn't it? I really want to kind of give this like kind of something of a high gloss shine. Yeah, not bad so far, although I do want a little bit more underneath, just like here, and maybe a little less here. There we go. And again, it's close, but it's not quite there. I'm going to go ahead and choose my bright highlight color and add just a little touch of that in here too, just to really kind of get that singing shine in there, so to speak. So, yeah. There we go. And one of the other things I like to do with my lights quite a bit is that I don't really necessarily like the harsh, hard line that sometimes is okay with shadow. So I'm going to blur out the edge here just a touch by using my smudge tool. And what hopefully the effect that's rendered here is giving it, again, more of a feel that we've got some sort of a gunmetal type texture going on here. Maybe not perfect, but I think it's close enough for our cartoon type look that we're going for. There we go. All right. Now, there is a shadow I just suddenly realized I forgot to render. Let me go ahead back in here and add it. It's right here. Our little gun barrel. There's a little cast shadow here. I just want to make sure we get that taken care of before I forget. It's one of those things where if I don't address it now, I'll probably forget it later on. And then I'll be very disappointed with the look later. So let me just go ahead and put that in there too. There we go. We'll go back to our light layer, and light and shadow do not mix. So anywhere there's a shadow, light doesn't appear. We can kind of clean that up a little bit. And there we go. I think that looks a little bit better. All right, what else do we got here? Well, a lot of gun work here to do. So I'm going to go back to my main green color here, and I'm just going to kind of put some, just a little bit of green kind of along the edges that might reflect some light off the portal. And I'm going to take a similar approach, obviously, to the figure as well. So I'm going to get that sleeve in there really good. I'm going to get the bottom portion of his jacket in here. This side of his arm is certainly going to have some here. I'll clean it up a little bit later. I just want to kind of lay in some blocks for right now. And I'm going to do something similar to his face and hair. Not so much here. Skin's not going to be as reflective, so I'm going to be a little bit sparing with it. Same thing with the hair. Hair has a little reflection to it, but we're not trying to render individual strands or anything. So we're just going to kind of keep it light and simple, just like the style of the cartoon. Not overthink it, and try to finish this up with a bang a little bit, All right, let's see what we got. Take a little stock here. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead, and I'm going to add my bright highlight color in here too. I'm just going to kind of put in a little bit of the brighter color around some of the outer edges, just where I feel like a little bit of enhancement might be beneficial, like the shoulder right here, and maybe a little bit of this arm. This is subtle. You're probably not even barely registering it on the on your computer screen or whatever screen you're viewing this through, but it can make a little bit of a difference in the right spots. So I just want to kind of make sure I get it in where I feel like it's necessary, and then just like before, just kind of smudge a couple of these areas because I just don't want as hard of a line. All right, again, just kind of taking stock here by zooming out and kind of figuring out if it's done, or if it needs a few more tweaks, or if there's an area that I forgot or missed or something like that. And I think, again, for the most part, I'm happy. I think we got a little something to work with here. Now, final test, let me go ahead and pull up our portal and see how it looks with the palette removed and our composition is all together. Now, again, let me just stress, we're really not done here. There's still some more work to do and touch-ups, but that's going to be for another video, our last video. So one more time, let me thank you if you've been watching up until this point. One more to go. Stay tuned. It'll be up soon. Thanks again. Thanks for stopping by the channel. Hope to see you.